What is up everyone, Ed here, back with another move with Rhino. In today's video, we're at Climb Tacoma in Tacoma, Washington. It's a climbing gym. We want to show you guys how to capture a simple, professional looking interview using RŌV Pro. So let's go inside and I'll show you guys how we do it. So we're inside the climbing gym now, and the first thing to consider when shooting an interview is making sure you have good composition and good lighting. So right now, it's a little bit dark, but we have these ceiling lights, but the problem is they're kind of harsh on my face. They're gonna cast a lot of harsh shadows, and since there's no windows, we're not gonna get any kind of natural lighting. So we could shoot in here, but it won't be as nice as it could be. And so there's actually another room on the other side that has some, big open windows, so we're gonna go check it out and see if that's gonna look better. Yeah, this looks pretty good. This is much better. Now that we have the location we want to film in all figured out, there's beautiful natural lighting in here. Let's talk about what gear we'll be using in order to nail this interview shot. Essentially, we want to keep this as compact as possible. So we're kind of going for like a minimal setup. We don't want to bring too much gear with us to capture this. So the first thing we're going to be doing is using tripod Manfrotto 755XB, really good and sturdy. This is the Manfrotto 5001B. It's a light stand. It's really awesome because the leg kind of folds within itself, which allows it to keep it very compact, but I wouldn't recommend putting anything heavy on it because it's just not sturdy enough for that. But the light we're using on it is actually the RŌV Pro light. It's a bicolor, full spectrum LED light, and it's really lightweight, really small, so it'll go perfectly with this light stand. The ND filter we're using is actually a Tiffin variable ND. We probably don't need to use an ND, but because we're shooting on the Sony a7 III, we want to shoot in 4K, and we're going to have to shoot it in 24 frames per second at 1/50th of a shutter speed. 1/50th of a shutter speed. So it's going to be really, really bright without an ND filter, so we're using the Tiffin one. That's my next point with the Sony a7 III as well, is because we want to shoot in 4K because we'll have a lot more playroom in post-production, because when you shoot in 4K, because of the resolution, we could punch in if for some reason the interview was a little bit far back. Another thing to note on the Sony a7 Mark III is that because we like to shoot in the Sony S-Log2 color profile, we want to use an ND filter because the minimum ISO is 800. So it's still pretty bright for a setting like this. So another big reason why I want to use the ND filter. Now in terms of the lens we're using a 35mm 1.4. But you don't want to shoot too shallow or a low f-stop on your interview because you still want to get the subject pretty much in focus. So we're shooting at about f2, f2.2. Now in terms of audio, we would normally have a really big boom setup to have professional audio, but because we're trying to keep it running gun style, we're using the Rode Link Wireless Filmmaker Lav Kit. It gets the job done well. And last but not least, we have camera movement, and we're using the RŌV Pro traveler length slider. This is going to allow us to get those cinematic sliding shots within the interview. And yeah, so everything we're going to be using, you're seeing right here on this table. It's really simple, really compact. Let's get this shot. Now that we have all of our gear set up, we're about ready to shoot here, but I want to give you guys a quick couple tips on when trying to nail this interview shot. So obviously we have Stephanie here, she's our subject. And the first thing to consider is the framing. And so for us, there's a few ways you can go about getting interview shots, but we want to keep it really clean and simple. So we're going to have her left framed and then also not looking at the camera. So I'm going to be conducting the interview while the slider is looping to get that camera movement, but I'll actually be standing right about here asking Stephanie the question so she can answer me. That way it'll make it look really clean and modern, and that's kind of what we're going for. Now, in terms of lighting, like we talked about earlier, the room before was too dark. And so the great thing about this room, there's a lot of big windows, a lot of natural lighting. And so we don't necessarily need a big key light. And a key light would probably go somewhere around right here, and it would give like that big soft light on her face. But because the natural lighting in here is so good, we don't need that. And we're trying to keep it as simple and running gun style as possible. Now in the back here, we have a RŌV Pro light. It's pretty powerful, but what this light will be used for is actually a hair light on Stephanie. And so what that will do is kind of give good separation between her and the background, which just kind of gives it a more dynamic look when shooting the interview, and it'll kind of illuminate her hair a little bit on this left side, and it's gonna make it look more professional. And so let me show you guys what RŌV settings we're gonna actually be using to get the shot. So first things first, we gotta connect the RŌV Pro to our smartphone. So we're gonna go to the RŌV Motion app. We're using a camera today, Sony a7 III. And now we're in. Now we have the RŌV Motion app open and RŌV Pro is connected to the smartphone. Let's talk about which settings we're gonna be using to capture this interview. So for duration, we're actually gonna go to about, let's go maybe 35 seconds is pretty good. For ramp, it's gonna be, how it eases in and eases out. And so we're gonna go to probably about 50. Looping, this is really important. We wanna have looping on. That means that the slider will keep moving back and forth as I'm conducting the interview. So we don't want it to just stop as soon as it reaches another end. So I think this is pretty good, really simple. We're just gonna hit start, see what we can get.
Because when you're rock climbing, you are gonna fail. You're gonna believe that you're failing more times than you're actually gonna feel like you're succeeding. But when you actually bring yourself to that success, it is so satisfying to you and it makes you want to keep going. So what I would say is don't be afraid of failing, don't be afraid of falling, because that is about 90% of the sport.
So that looked pretty good. I mean, really cinematic because we have some subtle movement while Stephanie is talking. But in order to make this interview even better, we're gonna use RŌV Pro and obviously the camera to capture some B-roll. And we're gonna lay that B-roll over Stephanie talking, and it's gonna take that interview to a whole nother level. So let's go get some B-roll.
My name is Stephanie, and I'm a route setter and coach here at Climb Tacoma. Rock climbing is really interesting because it's unlike any other sport. You can't just rely on your physical ability. You have to use your mental ability, and you have to be extremely creative in order to figure things out. And I think that's really interesting. When you're first getting into rock climbing, you have to be okay with the idea of falling and not succeeding more times than succeeding. Because when you're rock climbing, you are gonna fail. You're gonna believe that you're failing more times than you're actually gonna feel like you're succeeding. But when you actually bring yourself to that success, it is so satisfying to you and it makes you wanna keep going. So what I would say is don't be afraid of failing, don't be afraid of falling, because that is about 90% of the sport.
All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in for today's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed how to shoot this interview using RŌV Pro. Big shout out to Steph as well for letting us film here at Climb Tacoma and for also being our interviewee. If you guys have any questions, make sure you leave them down below. We'll be sure to get back to them. Like this video if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys in the next Move with Rhino. Boom! Let's go!